At 6, Prince Andrew is losing his royal and military titles. He will no longer officially be known as His Royal Highness. Buckingham Palace says Prince Andrew, seen leaving Windsor this morning, is handing his titles back to the Queen and will continue not to undertake any public duties. The move comes the day after a judge in New York ruled the prince must defend an accusation of sexually assaulting Virginia Giuffre in a civil court case. The prince denies the accusation. Buckingham Palace says he will now defend himself as a private citizen. Also tonight, MI5 issues a rare alert warning of a Chinese agent who has been operating for years trying to influence MPs at the heart of Westminster. The isolation period for anyone with COVID in England is being cut to 5 full days from next week. And no let-up in the pressure on Boris Johnson as some Tory MPs say he should resign for attending a drinks party during lockdown.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, the teams are yet to be finalised, but Team GB and Paralympics GB set their medal targets for the upcoming Winter Games in Beijing.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. Buckingham Palace has announced that Prince Andrew is returning his royal and military titles to the Queen. He will no longer be referred to as His Royal Highness in any official capacity. It comes just a day after Prince Andrew's lawyers failed to persuade a judge in America to dismiss a civil lawsuit against him that accuses him of sexually abusing a teenager 2 decades ago. The Duke of York has consistently denied the allegations. Buckingham Palace says he will continue not to carry out any public duties and will defend the civil court case as a private citizen. Here's our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell.
The Duke of York near his home in Windsor Great Park today. Behind the scenes, there were clearly discussions with his advisers and with other members of his family. It's clear that the impossibility of his retaining his remaining honorary military positions had been accepted by the Queen, particularly after yesterday's court ruling in New York. He is therefore no longer the honorary colonel of the Grenadier Guards. That will be a relief to them. His continued links to the regiment had become an embarrassment. A statement from Buckingham Palace a short time ago said, "With the Queen's approval and agreement, the Duke of York's military affiliations and royal patronages have been returned to the Queen. The Duke of York will continue not to undertake any public duties and is defending this case as a private citizen." That certainly seems to suggest that Andrew is determined to fight on, but steps are being taken to insulate, as far as possible, the royal family from further embarrassment.
And Nick is with me now. This is breaking news this evening. Very swift action from Buckingham Palace after yesterday's ruling.
Yes, I mean, they've had weeks, months really, to think about it, and it was pretty clear after the hearing the way in which this was heading. Now, we understand from sources at Buckingham Palace that there has been considerable discussion within the family, obviously involving the Queen, which has resulted in this statement tonight. He is not losing his HRH styling, it is simply that he will not use it, rather like the Sussexes. In terms of the military patronages, the honorary positions that he held, it was just becoming absolutely clear that it was untenable for him to continue in these last remaining royal roles. We talked last night about the Grenadier Guards, his position as honorary colonel of the Grenadier Guards. It will, as I said there, be a great relief to the regiment that he has disassociated himself from them. As I say, no longer using the HRH. In terms of responses from his own team, they are indicating that he is going to continue to fight on. They are saying that the ruling in New York yesterday was not a judgment on the merits of Miss Giuffre's allegations. This is a marathon, not a sprint, and the Duke will continue to defend himself against these claims. Now, that would suggest that he is not, at least at this point, going to seek an out-of-court settlement. And Virginia Giuffre's lawyer has indicated that she is not interested in a purely monetary settlement. So it may be that she wants some sort of public acknowledgement. But clearly from Andrew's side, he is, we understand, fighting on.
Nick Richell, thank you. MI5 has issued a rare alert to MPs warning that a woman has been working as an agent for the Chinese state trying to influence British politicians. The security service claims that Christine Lee was engaged in political interference on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, said it was deeply concerning, but insisted the UK had strong structures in place to identify and deal with such matters. Here's our security correspondent, Gordon Carrera.
A figure at the heart of Westminster, with access to politicians from all sides and the funds to back it up. But today, lawyer Christine Lee is accused of working secretly on behalf of the Chinese state. In a highly unusual move, MI5 today issued this alert to Parliament. It warned that she has been working with an arm of the Chinese Communist Party to covertly interfere in UK politics through establishing links with established and aspiring parliamentarians.
The fact that this alert has become public today in the way in which it has is really a very strong illustration of how our intelligence and security agencies have been working together to really spot and identify this type of activity, activity that could potentially do harm to our country and harm to our democracy.
There was no one here today at Christine Lee's London office, and she's not yet responded to the claims. The allegation is that she was funneling money to politicians, claiming it came from within the UK, when in fact it came from China, all in order to secure influence for the Chinese Communist Party. Former Labour frontbencher Barry Gardiner received more than £400,000 from her over 5 years. In a statement today, he said he'd been liaising with MI5 and that he stopped receiving money for parliamentary researchers in 2020, although her son was working in his office until he resigned today.
This is really serious. We don't play this down. I'm not running scare stories. I am genuinely concerned and shocked that this has been allowed to happen. We need to understand why and we need to do something about it. But we also have to recognise that the Chinese government poses a clear and present danger to us and stop messing around.
At MI5, concerns about Chinese influence have been growing in recent years. And today's move is a sign that the fears go right to the heart of Westminster. And today's alert comes after what I understand was a lengthy and serious investigation by MI5 just down the road. And it revealed that Christine Lee had a wide set of contacts across all parties here at Westminster. It is noticeable, though, that even though MI5 felt they had to act, she is not being prosecuted. This isn't about spying in the traditional sense, about someone stealing secrets. It's about influence. And the view was that the best way to disrupt those alleged activities was by issuing this very unusual warning. Sophie.
Gordon Carrera, thank you. The Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has announced that he's cutting the isolation period for people testing positive for COVID in England to 5 full days. From Monday, people who've tested positive can leave isolation at the start of day 6, as long as they have a negative test on days 5 and 6. It's hoped it will ease pressure on employers hit by staff absences. Here's our health correspondent, Sophie Hutchinson.
This restaurant in Manchester, one of 6 in a group employing around 500 people. Today, senior managers were raising a glass to government plans to lower the number of days for self-isolation.
From a business perspective, it's going to give people confidence to come out again. We've been seeing that over the last few months, and we really need to just take the shackles off and get things moving again.
We've made the decision to reduce the minimum self-isolation period to 5 full days in England. From Monday, people can test twice before they go, leaving isolation at the start of day 6.
And some scientists agree it is the right balance of risks.
The negative impacts of that isolation on our services, on our schools, on our jobs is probably not worth the additional benefits. And I think the 5-day rule at the moment is probably the right thing.
So how long does it take to stop being infectious after getting COVID? Well, estimates suggest that at 14 days, the original isolation period, just 1% of people remain infectious. At 7 days, that figure increases to 16%. And at 5 days, the new minimum isolation period from next week, that figure increases again to around a third of people who are still infectious. That's why people will be required to have 2 negative lateral flow results before being released from self-isolation. The first test can now be taken on day 5, but some are urging caution.
If you do test negative and you are going to come out of isolation on day 6, you should still be cautious, particularly about interacting with vulnerable people. You should still be a little bit concerned that you might be infectious.
The new rules bring England into line with Scotland, but self-isolation is still 7 days long in Wales and Northern Ireland. Sophie Hutchinson, BBC News.
The government's latest coronavirus figures show there were 109,133 new infections in the latest 24-hour period. So 138,268 new cases on average per day in the last week. 19,721 people are in hospital with COVID. Another 335 deaths were reported of people who died within 28 days of a positive test. On average, in the past week, there were 261 deaths per day. On vaccinations, just over 36 million people have had a booster jab. That's more than 62.7% of those aged 12 and over. In France, where more than 300,000 new COVID infections have again been recorded today, the government has announced it is reopening its borders to British travellers and holidaymakers tomorrow. Before Christmas, France imposed a ban on most people entering the country from the UK to try to slow the spread of Omicron. But from tomorrow, all vaccinated travellers will just have to show a negative PCR or lateral flow test taken 24 hours before departure. England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Professor Sir Jonathan Van Tam, has announced that he's stepping down from the role in March and will return to his work at the University of Nottingham.
It's a bit like being 3-0 up in a game and thinking, well, we can't possibly lose this now. But how many times have you seen the other side take it 4-3?
He has been praised for his direct style of communicating public health messages and his colourful analogies at Downing Street news conferences. Boris Johnson has thanked him for what he called his extraordinary contribution to our country. The number of people on a hospital waiting list in England has hit another record high. Figures for the end of November show 6 million people were waiting for routine surgery. And in December, nearly 13,000 patients had to wait more than 12 hours in A&E for a bed to become available, another record. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, sent this report from Birmingham.
Birmingham. The pandemic's cast a long shadow here. The spread of COVID may be slowing, but as in many communities, it could take years to clear the backlog of cancelled operations.
So this one is a Hurricane Performante.
Ollie, who works in a car dealership, needs surgery, but he hasn't even been put on the waiting list yet.
They've supported me really, really well.
Ollie has Crohn's disease, which causes inflammation of the digestive system. He needed a bowel operation and now has a stoma and waste bag. He's still waiting to have that reversed.
It's life-changing. Obviously, there's obviously restrictions that I've got. There's self-awareness, there's mental issues that you're always thinking of people looking at you. Do I look different? There's a lot of aspects, and I'd like to obviously draw a line in it, have it done, have that procedure done, then move on with my life, really.
To give an idea of the scale of the waiting list, Birmingham has a population of just over 1 million. Close to 6 times that number are now waiting for planned surgery or procedures in England. Clearing the backlog is one thing, but here in the West Midlands and elsewhere, hospital staff are struggling with daily emergencies and colleagues getting ill.
More staff are off sick every single day.
Kishan is a doctor working locum shifts in A&E departments in the area.
It's been very stressful in A&E. There were days last week where I was receiving messages asking if I could come into work just for a few hours, but the concern that I have is how unpredictable it is with NHS staff going off sick and not knowing from one day to the next whether there'll be enough staff in the hospital on the floor able to look after the patients who are there.
I spoke to an A&E nurse in a Welsh hospital who wished to remain anonymous.
We've got elderly patients in cupboards on trolleys for hours on end. They're cupboards that don't fit beds, and this is what we're dealing with. It's a logistical nightmare, and it's It's unsafe and it's just not what we all signed up for.
We are running on escalation numbers every day.
All hospitals in the UK are facing varying pressure. This one in Warrington, for example, understands the struggle with finding beds. NHS England said staff dealt with a record number of life-threatening ambulance call-outs last month, and services like cancer care were still prioritised. With changing seasons, the pressure may ease, but the NHS faces a difficult future. Workforce shortages and rising waiting lists, issues which will feature prominently in the political landscape. Hugh Pym, BBC News, Birmingham.
Cabinet ministers have pledged their support for the Prime Minister after he admitted attending a drinks party in the Downing Street garden during the first coronavirus lockdown. Boris Johnson apologised yesterday, saying he thought the gathering in May 2020 was work-related, but he's been facing calls from some senior Conservatives to resign. Tonight, the Metropolitan Police said it has ongoing contact with the Cabinet Office, which is conducting an inquiry into the gatherings at Number 10, and if evidence is found of behaviour that is potentially a criminal offence, it will be passed to the police. Here's our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth.
There's no easy way to clean up the current situation, and since first thing, no sign of the Prime Minister. A planned public visit was cancelled because one of his family has COVID. While he hunkered down here, others spoke up for him after yesterday's apology.
He was ashen-faced, he was upset, he was truly, genuinely, heartfelt sorry for the upset and the rage that people are feeling. He gets it.
Other than to apologise for
On the airwaves, there was a chorus of loyalty.
There is no question in my mind Boris Johnson was acting in good faith.
With hindsight, he regrets going out to the garden.
He has apologised, very, very clearly.
The Cabinet have shown their support, including the Chancellor, though from him it was quieter.
Mr. Speaker, I want to apologise.
For many, yesterday's apology just didn't cut it. The mood among Tories is dim. Some critics are keeping their counsel for now, waiting perhaps to hear from their constituencies. In Stamford, rock-solid Tory turf,
some good things.
Long-standing members of the Conservative Association were as one.
If he wants to be remembered as a good Prime Minister, then I think he has to consider, is it the time now to resign?
I think it would be better if he just resigned rather than waiting for a vote of confidence. I think he would get a lot more respect.
A lot of the long-serving members in the association have very vocally said that it's time for him to go.
Scotland's Tory leader has already said the same. His call for Boris Johnson to resign caused something of a party row.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, as anyone, is entitled to their opinions. I don't have to agree with them.
Jacob Rees-Mogg had called him a lightweight and today questioned his loyalty.
It seems to me that people who hold office ought to support the leader of the party. That is the...
He also suggested lockdown rules might have been too tough at the time of the Downing Street gathering. There's a frenzy of finger-pointing. Whether public or private, there is real anger across the Conservative Party at Boris Johnson. But many MPs are waiting for the findings of the official investigation before passing final judgment. Even when that's published in the next week or so, it's likely it will be the political mood that follows that ultimately determines the Prime Minister's fate. Labour says there's no reason to wait.
He knowingly misled, lied to Parliament, which in itself is a resignation offence under the Ministerial Code, but we're also calling for him to resign because of the damage that he's done to public trust and public confidence in health measures at a crucial time.
For now, Boris Johnson is in Downing Street, but make no mistake, this matter is far from closed. Well, tonight there's been a new statement from the Metropolitan Police who say they too are waiting for the findings of that Cabinet Office investigation. They say if the inquiry identifies evidence of behaviour that is potentially a criminal offence, it will be passed to the Met for further consideration. That decision already criticised by some, but it seems for now all eyes are on the investigation being led by the Civil Service. It's not clear what it will find or how definitive it will be, but it's clear it will set the tone for what follows.
Alex, thank you. The time is almost 6:20. Our top story this evening. Prince Andrew loses his royal and military titles. He will no longer be officially known as His Royal Highness. And coming up, the chemical cocktail of sewage, plastics and rubbish polluting every river in England, according to a new report.
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News Channel, the 5th Ashes Test gets underway in Hobart overnight. We hear from the England camp on salvaging pride and managing injuries.
Shoppers splashed out at Christmas last year despite the arrival of the Omicron variant. Retail Christmas sales soared according to the latest figures. Tesco and Marks & Spencer had a particularly good Christmas compared to 2 years ago, with M&S's overall sales up around 9% and Tesco's up by 7.5%. Other brands, including Sainsbury's, Next and B&M, have also reported strong Christmas sales. But retailers are now wondering what will happen to consumer spending given the looming squeeze on living standards from rising bills. Our business correspondent Emma Simpson reports from Colchester.
Christmas in Colchester, a town that likes to put on a show. Feels a long time ago now, so how did it go? Phoenix is the biggest store on the high street. It's done well all year. This whole chain's had a good Christmas too.
Overall, we traded very, very strongly and our full price sales were significantly up on 2019, and of course we performed massively better than 2020.
As for Omicron, having most of your shops in smaller towns has been a help.
The footfall impact in London is massively down compared to a location like Colchester. I think people are falling back in love with local towns. It's easier sometimes, especially if you're working from home.
Omicron did have an impact. Footfall in December was still nearly a fifth lower than it was before the pandemic, but it didn't stop us spending. And despite all the supply chain problems and labour shortages, Christmas actually turned out to be pretty decent for retailers overall. As for this one, it had its best ever food sales in the week before Christmas. Supermarkets getting a boost from more dining and drinking at home. Consumers were splashing the cash, but will it last? Do you think you're going to be reining back on spending now a bit?
Yes, we were just talking about that, weren't we?
Literally just were,
yeah, got to be careful now. We spent an awful lot on food, and we want holidays. So now it's been relaxed. We're going to cut back on the shopping side.
That's not what retailers want to hear.
The retailers I'm talking to are nervous about the impact of inflation on the amount of money that people will have in their pockets, how much tax they need to pay, the inflation that they will see on their energy bills and on some of the goods that they buy. And all of those things could well dampen demand for retail products.
As they try to clear the way for the new year, retailers are also wondering how much of their own rising costs they can pass on. Emma Simpson, BBC News, Colchester.
Staff shortages because of COVID mean many care homes and home care companies are having to turn vulnerable people away in England. At least 49 out of 150 councils in England are introducing emergency measures to ration the care they provide to older and disabled people. Increased pressures caused by Omicron means demand is huge. Here's our social affairs editor, Alison Holt.
This council-run team is at full stretch trying to get patients home from hospital in central Norfolk.
And any falls reported?
Today they have nearly 230 people who are well enough to be discharged but need support in the community.
So many care homes are now closed because of COVID.
The virus and shortages of care staff mean there simply aren't enough care home places or home care services available for all those needing help.
It means that the demand on our service is greater than it ever has been, but the numbers of resources that we can get, care homes or providers, is less than it ever has been.
The pressures that the team in there are facing, trying to get the right support for people, are pressures that are being faced in many different parts of the country. And that means some really difficult decisions are having to be made.
I'm here to do a PCR test on a lady that...
Deep-rooted staffing shortages mean many care services like this home care company have had to stop taking on new clients. It means across Norfolk there are now 870 people waiting for care. And the council is one of at least 49 authorities in England bringing in emergency measures to ration this support.
If you go into something like a pandemic with an already stressed system, then you get very close to the edge.
The man who runs Norfolk's care services says they have no choice.
When you're this pressured, then you've got to start making decisions that balance the individual person's need with the safety of the wider community. So, for example, if someone's getting 4 visits a day for social care support, we might have to look at a situation where we're saying one of those visits could perhaps stop, and we could use that visit for somebody else who's waiting for social care.
Chris, your tea's ready. It's on the table.
Thank you.
But for someone like Chris Evans, any cuts to his 3 care visits a day would have a huge impact. He needs support after a bleed on his brain. The care also allows his wife to work.
Very important to me. It helps me feel, works towards more independence.
People are assessed as needing care. The care visits that they have are important, and I would think that it's a very dangerous path that they will be treading because it leaves people vulnerable.
The government says it's put significant extra money into social care and staff recruitment. Alison Holt, BBC News.
Not a single river in England is free from pollution, according to the findings of an influential group of MPs. The Environmental Audit Committee says it's uncovered a chemical cocktail of sewage, agricultural waste and plastic in our waterways. They're calling for tougher enforcement of rules on dumping and better monitoring of the problem. Here's our environment correspondent, Jonah Fisher.
See it down there? I don't know what that is. It looks like a bit like poo, doesn't it?
Ashley Smith is searching for sewage.
These particles coming out.
This is Shill Brook in Oxfordshire, a stream that receives the outflow from 2 water treatment plants.
With this camera, we've seen basically chopped up, untreated sewage coming out.
His videos, evidence of an ecosystem being steadily poisoned. It's one of many. Today's Environmental Audit Committee report found that not a single river in England is free of pollution, with many a chemical cocktail of sewage, agricultural waste and plastic. Water companies, farmers and regulators are all to blame, the MPs say. As are many of us. If you throw sanitary products down the toilet, stop. Removing the blockages and fatbergs they cause costs about £100 million every year.
In this report, MPs call for tougher financial penalties for those who pollute and describe the current water testing system as outdated and inadequate. But with new homes being built and climate change likely to bring more rain, cleaning up England's rivers is going to take one thing more than any other, and that's money.
The problem has arisen from a chronic long-term underinvestment in sewers, in water quality monitoring, in regulation. It's not surprising at all. We need to take it seriously and we need to do more faster.
The government welcomed the report, saying many of the issues raised were already being tackled.
So when the sewage has been fully treated in the sewage works...
For the water companies, attention has been focused once again on how regularly they claim exceptional circumstances and allow untreated water into our rivers.
We regard all discharges of untreated sewage as unacceptable, but it's going to take a long time to get that problem completely solved.
The question is whether the political will and funds exist to try and fix what the MPs called a mess. For years, the state of our rivers was something of a dirty secret. Now it's very much in the open. Jonah Fisher, BBC News.
Back now to our main story tonight, and Prince Andrew has returned all of his military honours and royal titles and will no longer be known as His Royal Highness in any official capacity. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell is with me for a last word, and quite a moment for the Queen, for the royal family.
Yeah, it is. There's no question about that at all. They have reacted very quickly, as I think they had to. And I think that one must suppose that Princes Charles and William will have had considerable influence within that discussion with the Queen. This is all about now protecting the royal family from reputational damage, protecting the Queen's platinum jubilee from embarrassment. So to recap, he has given up by mutual agreement, we're told, his remaining honorary military roles. Now, there are more than a dozen regiments that he's colonel of in this country, in Canada and New Zealand. And I think it is fair to say tonight that there is considerable relief in military circles that this has happened. And as you say, he will no longer be known as His Royal Highness. He's not been stripped of it, but he will no longer be known as it. But he says, or his sources close to him are saying, he will continue to defend himself against these claims.
Nick, thank you. Time now for a look at the weather with Thomas Schaffernacker.
Sophie, thank you. Good evening to you. Lots of fog in the forecast for tonight and into tomorrow. It really could be quite dense across more southern and central parts of the UK, and sometimes it actually forms later on in the morning rather than right from the word go. It's brought by this large area of high pressure, which is across many western parts of Europe. Light winds, clear skies, moisture, and the perfect recipe for fog. So through the course of this evening, that fog will be forming across the Midlands, parts of Wales, in the south of the country as well, becoming really quite dense in places. Further north, I don't think it'll be quite as foggy or as cold. In fact, in Western Scotland, temperatures of around 8 degrees, whereas across England and Wales, a frost, in fact, -4 degrees in some spots. So no doubt some of that fog will be freezing in some areas. And again, if it doesn't form right through the night, it might form later on in the morning and linger through the morning into the afternoon. And sometimes that fog lifts to those low grey hanging skies, giving way to really raw day and some quite low temperatures. So in some spots, temperatures will be barely above freezing, particularly in the countryside, but with a bit of sunshine, I think we're talking around, say, 5 to 7. So fairly chilly day, but much milder there. Again, in Western Scotland, tropical 10 degrees Celsius. Here's the forecast or the weather map for Saturday and indeed for the weekend. Really high pressure still dominating the weather, not just around our shores, but much of Europe. So very little change expected in the forecast for the next few days. The temperatures will be bang on average for some of us and similar weather by day with that fog forming overnight into the early hours. So very steady on the weather front at the moment. Back to you.
Thomas, thank you. And that's all from the BBC News at 6. It's goodbye from me on BBC One. We join the BBC's news teams where you are. Goodbye.